At 18, I became Marcus Carter's exclusive kept woman. I did it until I was 28. He was about to get married, yet he still refused to let me go. At his bachelor party, I went to pick him up. Right outside the door, I heard his friend ask, "You're getting married, bro. Has that girl you've been keeping caused a scene?" Marcus crossed his legs, looking utterly relaxed. "She did. She tried to make a deal with me. Money or a title?" His friend asked, taking those two options for granted. Marcus let out a soft, mocking sneer. "She said she wants to go to Harvard Law." The room erupted into laughter. A high school dropout wanting to go to Harvard Law? What a joke. Marcus smiled helplessly, swirling his drink. "Well, she's my girl. If she wants it, I'll buy her way in." With those words from Marcus, I ignored all the mockery and let my heart settle. 3 months later, Marcus kept his promise and drove me to the campus. But the registration desk he brought me to was actually Harvard's janitorial hiring office. He stood there, hands in his pockets, and gestured toward the door. "With your skills, being a janitor here is more than enough." Seeing me stand frozen, he laughed softly, tilted my chin up and whispered, "What? Not happy? You gave me a condition harder than climbing to heaven just because you wanted to be Mrs. Carter, didn't you?" I snapped my head away, pulled my near-perfect LSAT score sheet out of my bag, and slammed it hard against his chest. "Marcus, I did my part. I just didn't expect you to be so useless." Marcus looked down at the certificate in his arms. Stunned for half a second, he flipped through it carelessly and laughed. "Chloe, how can you be so stupid? You gave me a fake score sheet? It's a bit of a pity you can't be Mrs. Carter." As if realizing something, his laugh grew even more mocking. "You didn't actually think a Harvard degree would make you good enough to marry into the Carter family, did you?" I looked at him and smiled, a bitter, mocking smile. "Mr. Carter, I know exactly who I am. In the billionaire circle, women like me are just toys. Even though I've been with Marcus for 10 years, that's still all I am to him. But I've been with you for 10 years. Now that it's ending, you can't even get me a college degree?" Marcus looked down at me, his expression arrogant. "Baby, I'd love to help, but you haven't opened a textbook in 10 years. You can't just get into a school like that. Besides, Harvard isn't Carter territory. Did you really think you could fool them with a fake certificate?" My face went serious as I told him earnestly, "This score sheet is real. While you were busy preparing for your wedding, I was studying my ass off." Marcus clarified softly, his hand brushing against my cheek. "Jealous? You're quite the actress. I almost fell for it. Maybe I should put you in Hollywood. You'd make a great star." I jerked my head to dodge his hand and sneered. "Marcus, do you even know me?" The year I moved into his mansion, the thing I gave up was a 1585 SAT score. Back then, I had the brains, but I didn't have the power to pay off a $3 million debt. Today, I still have the brains, but my freedom was bought by him. The scorching sun began to wear down Marcus's patience. His tone turned cold and sharp. "Of course I know you. You're putting on this whole show just to remind me not to ignore you, aren't you?" Hearing that, I fell completely silent. This conversation was going nowhere. As my master, Marcus gave me the best food, clothes, and shelter, expecting nothing but my eternal gratitude. But how could he ever understand that what a caged bird wants most is the endless sky? "Are you taking the janitor job or not?" he asked. "No. Fine. I'll give you one more chance. Ask for another compensation. Send me to Harvard." Marcus's eyes darkened completely. A mocking sneer slipped from his nose. "I've spoiled you too much." With that, he got into his car and slammed on the gas, leaving me stranded. It was a remote suburb. I couldn't even get an Uber signal. Pale under the baking sun, I pulled out my phone and called the Harvard admissions office. The voice on the other end said, "An LSAT score alone isn't enough for your situation. The fastest way is to retake the SATs and get an outstanding score. And of course, ma'am, we hope you understand that tuition at Harvard Law is nearly $100,000 a year. Please be prepared." My body swayed. I had no money. Marcus rarely gave me cash. If I wanted something, he would buy it directly. I knew he was afraid I'd take the money and run. After all, that happened all the time in his circle. Lowering my gaze, I spoke in a hoarse voice. "I'll take the test first. I'll figure out the money later." I'd been his secret mistress for so long. If it wasn't for money, did I actually expect love? Since they all claimed I wanted money, then fine. I would take the money and go. In the end, I took a local bus back to the city. The bumpy ride made my stomach cramp until I threw up. I forced myself onto a train, feeling half dead by the time I made it home. The mansion was pitch black. Too exhausted to flip the switch, I fumbled my way toward the bedroom in the dark. "Learned your lesson yet?" Marcus's voice cut through the silence. He was hiding in the shadows, scaring me so badly I jumped. Stopping in my tracks, I took a deep breath before whispering, "Yes. Marcus, I don't want to go to school anymore. Just give me money instead. Not much. Just $1 million. I was telling the truth. $1 million was just pocket change to men like him, the cost of a few lavish dinners. But Marcus chuckled, leaning back on the sofa carelessly. Suddenly, I don't feel like giving it to you. Why? My voice sounded like a dying ember. No reason. He spoke with the arrogance of a man who ruled the world. Marcus was always impossible to read. He was willing to pay off my $3 million debt. Yet he begrudged me a single million. He clearly didn't love me, yet he refused to let me go. At that thought, a surge of anger flared up inside me. I spat back. Did Carter Enterprises go bankrupt? Or are you just like those cheap, married old men who count every single penny they spend on their mistresses? Marcus stood up and closed the distance. The suffocating scent of expensive tobacco invaded my senses. Chloe, sometimes I really want to strip away every single one of your thorns. His fingers traced slowly along my skin, sending a chill straight down my spine. Then he suddenly pulled his hand back, looking almost disappointed. But then again, you wouldn't be any fun without them. He tossed a pile of designer clothes and bags from the sofa over to me, smiling mockingly. My wife keeps a tight leash. I can't give you cash, but these little gifts are fine. Oh, and she monitors my time too. I have to go back to her now. I sneered, unable to resist poking him again. She keeps you on such a tight leash. And yet you still can't stay faithful? Marcus smirked from the doorway. You're just my kept woman. She's my wife. There's no conflict there. The heavy front door slammed shut. I threw the bags onto the floor in frustration. Then, remembering their resale value, I swallowed my pride and neatly packed them away. Looking at the luxury bags, a wave of familiar misery washed over me. Years ago, I tried to run. But Marcus caught me almost instantly. After that, I stopped trying, mostly because he wasn't married yet. My absolute red line was that I would never be the side chick to a married man. My mother had been a homewrecker. The legal wife set a trap for her, leaving her penniless and drowning in $3 million of debt. I was the one who had to pay for her sins. Now, I was about to walk down the exact same path. And I didn't know if I could survive the punishment this time. The next day, I went to the prep center to pick up my study materials. Afterward, I went to a luxury consignment shop to sell the clothes and bags Marcus had left me. But the moment I pulled the bags out, a beautifully dressed woman burst into the store and slapped me hard across the face. You shameless little thief. You stole my clothes and bags yesterday, and you're already trying to sell them today? The woman who slapped me was Samantha Sterling, Marcus's new bride. It was as if she had been waiting for me all along. In that instant, sheer terror seized my heart. I had no power to fight back. I stood there helplessly as she produced the receipts and called the cops. The value of the items was high enough to qualify as a felony. She wanted to throw me in prison. I sat in front of the police officers. They asked, "Did you steal these?" I wanted to deny it. But if I said no, I would have to tell them I was a mistress, and that Samantha's husband had given them to me. That would only drag me into a different kind of public humiliation. Just as the police were pressing me and I was about to speak, Marcus walked in. Without even glancing at me, he wrapped his arm around Samantha, his voice dripping with smooth charm. "Who dared to upset you, sweetheart? Why didn't you tell me first?" Samantha glared at him, pouting. "Marcus, stop playing dumb." Marcus shrugged, and only then did he bother to turn his gaze to me. I had been staring at him, my eyes filled with helplessness and desperation. Just like 10 years ago, when I begged him to save me. But this time Marcus didn't save me. Instead he smiled. "Pressing charges is such a hassle. Why don't we just lock her up for 10 days to let my wife blow off some steam?" He leaned closer to Samantha, his voice dangerously seductive. "How does that sound, babe?" Samantha's face flushed pink. "Fine, just this once." From beginning to end, Marcus never said a single word to clear my name. Instead, he joined hands with his wife to play with me like a toy. At that exact moment, I knew that if I didn't escape, they would eventually play me to death. 10 days later, I walked out of the detention center. My clothes hung loosely on my frame, and beneath the fabric, my body was covered in bruises. I had been beaten inside. Every pack has an alpha, and jail was no exception. From day one, the cell leader took a dislike to me. She had her lackeys beat me every single day for 10 days, finding a new excuse every time. Because I was too pretty, because I didn't speak, because I did speak, because I refused to lick their shoes. They dragged me into a living hell and tortured me for 10 days. When I finally got back to the mansion, I stood under the hot water for hours, desperately trying to scrub away every ounce of filth and degradation. Suddenly, the bathroom door was pushed open. Marcus leaned against the frame, clicking his tongue in mock pity. My poor little bird looked so pathetic. But his eyes held absolutely zero sympathy. I turned around, swallowing my shame. He asked again, "Chloe, do you finally know what you did wrong?" I ignored his question and asked my own. "The psycho's in there, you put them up to it, didn't you?" Marcus raised his hands in mock innocence. "How could I? I could never bear to hurt you." But my wife wasn't satisfied. She insisted on hiring someone, and I couldn't say no to her. I let out a bitter laugh. His permission was no different from him doing it himself. I shut off the water and began to dry myself. Marcus stepped onto the wet floor, opening a tube of ointment and gently applying it to my bruises. Chloe, don't ever sell the things I give you again. Understood. His voice was heavy, intimate. I took a step forward, instantly shattering the suffocating mood. Fine. Then give me cash. What do you need money for? Have I ever let you go hungry or cold? I want to go to college. At those words, Marcus suddenly pressed down hard on a bruise, making me gasp in pain. His voice turned freezing cold. What's the point of studying? You'll still end up crawling back to my bed anyway. Does school teach you how to please me? I wanted to tell him that I wanted a degree so I could escape to somewhere far, far away. So far that Marcus would completely forget about me, so that I could forget my past and live the brilliant life I had planned 10 years ago. But I couldn't say it. I didn't dare. We parted on horrible terms that night. As if sensing my desperation, Marcus not only locked me inside the mansion, but also stationed guards outside the doors. But I didn't care at all. My only goal was to get a near-perfect score on the SATs. Now that I was trapped inside, I had all the time in the world to study. After a few days of online classes, the camera turned on, and a completely different face appeared on my screen. Looking at the handsome face of the man on the screen, a memory flashed in my mind. He was my high school desk partner, Julian Vance. My younger sister was busy, so I'm subbing for her class today. He was just as shocked to see me, but he quickly explained and proceeded with the lesson. After class, we caught up. He asked why I vanished right after graduation, but I avoided the topic. Julian didn't press me. Instead, he shared what he had been up to. His family's company was headquartered in Massachusetts, and he had taken over the business after graduating college. Harvard University was right there in Massachusetts. Hearing this, a wild idea suddenly sparked in my mind. After a long silence, I asked, Julian, would you be interested in making an investment? He paused for a second on the screen, then looked at me with his bright, warm eyes and smiled. Tell me about it. Marcus kept me locked up for a whole month. If it were the old me, I would have lost my mind. But now, my days were entirely consumed by studying. I studied day and night, barely sleeping 4 hours a day. When Marcus finally came to see me, the first thing he saw was my deathly pale face. He frowned, his eyes filled with disgust. Where is Chloe? Why do you look like a ghost? I rolled my eyes. Whose fault do you think that is? Marcus seemed to be in a great mood. He just laughed at my snark. My bad. I'll take Chloe out for a walk tonight. He kept his word. That evening, he took me to a high society gala. The moment we walked in, whispers broke out around us. Mr. Carter and Samantha just got married. They spent a whole month on their honeymoon. Their relationship seemed so perfect. I thought he'd finally discarded this girl. Someone sneered in response. Well, you know men. They get bored of the same face eventually. Only then did I realize that the month Marcus had vanished was spent traveling with Samantha. Lowering my eyes, I quietly took a sip of my champagne. Marcus looked down at me, amusement dancing in his eyes. Jealous. I'll take you on a trip next time, okay? Hearing this, I snapped my head up, hope flaring in my chest. Can you take me to Massachusetts? Marcus frowned. Are you still dreaming about Harvard? I shook my head quickly. No. I just want to see it with you. Marcus's expression softened, and he agreed. All right. I promise. My heart leaped. Mentally, I checked off another step on my plan. Halfway through the gala, Marcus left to mingle. I slipped away to the back garden to get some fresh air. I had barely stood there for a minute when a woman suddenly grabbed me from behind, her voice trembling with rage. You little bitch. I finally found you. I turned around in utter disbelief. It was my mother, the one who was supposed to be behind bars. When did you get out? Years ago, to pay off her debts, she had conspired with some underground thugs to sell me off. I had found out just in time and called the cops. She and the entire scam ring were arrested. I never expected her to be free already. You heartless brat, you didn't even come look for me when I got out. Hurry, mom is broke. Give me some cash. I stared at her warily, my voice icy. I don't have any money. You're sleeping with a billionaire, and you're telling me you don't have money? Her voice was shrill, piercing my ears. Disgust washed over me. I don't. You need to leave right now, or he will destroy you. Her face contorted into something vicious, and she let out a low cackle. I gave you a chance, but you blew it. Don't blame me for what happens next. Before I could react, she shoved a chemical-soaked cloth over my nose and mouth. In an instant, my knees buckled, and my entire body went limp. Not far away, a greasy, heavy-set man was rubbing his hands together, staring at me like a piece of meat. I heard plenty of rich guys in this circle want to sleep with you. I'll sell you to them one by one. We'll be swimming in cash. My mother's voice was filled with manic excitement. Horror and despair choked me as they dragged me closer to the man. As we drew closer to him, I caught a glimpse of a figure out of the corner of my eye. It was Marcus. He stood there, hands in his pockets, calmly watching the entire scene with a dark, amused smile. It was a silent, sadistic invitation. I gathered every ounce of strength left in my lungs and screamed, "Marcus, save me." A look of pure satisfaction crossed his face as he strode toward us. Seeing him approach, my mother panicked, dropped me, and fled into the darkness. Before I hit the cold ground, Marcus caught me in his arms. Shivering violently in his embrace, I grit my teeth and asked, "If I hadn't begged you, would you have just stood there and watched?" He smirked, his voice dripping with innocence. "You're my kept woman. How could I ever let someone else have you?" Then he leaned in closer, whispering in my ear, "I just wanted you to realize that in this world, you have no one but me. Your only family is trash and you are utterly helpless on your own." I stared at him, my eyes wide with shock. Instantly, I understood. He was the one who had tipped off my mother. From the very beginning, he wanted me to realize that he, Marcus Carter, was my only lifeline. But what he didn't realize was that every living creature will fight to the death to escape its cage. And I had my own fight to win. I reached up, wrapped my arms around his neck, and softened my voice. "You're right. I guess I really have no one but you." My submission worked wonders. Marcus finally stopped restricting my freedom. 2 months later, I sat for the SATs. When the scores came out, I had achieved a near-perfect score. My tutor was in utter disbelief. "You're a genius. How do you only have a high school diploma?" I looked down and smiled. "Even geniuses have bills to pay, Mr. Davis." With the scores in hand, I finally wore down Marcus until he agreed to take me to Massachusetts. The night before the trip, he held me close and asked casually, "So, how did your little test go?" My fingers trembled slightly, but I kept my voice steady. "Just average. I just wanted to feel what it's like to study again." He leaned back, his eyes narrowing with a dark threat. "Enjoying it is fine. But if you actually got admitted, I would just drag you right back. Besides, a broke girl like you would get kicked out of a school like that in a heartbeat anyway." I leaned into his chest, playing the obedient pet. "I know. I'm staying right by your side." Marcus smiled in satisfaction. 3 days later, we boarded a first-class flight from Las Vegas to Massachusetts. I was restless the entire way, constantly looking out the window. Marcus noticed my anxiety. "What are you so nervous about?" I grabbed his hand, my voice shaking. "It's my first time flying. I'm just a little scared." "Pathetic," he sneered softly. He called the flight attendant over, ordered 2 glasses of wine, and handed one to me. "Drink up. You'll be there when you wake up." I took the glass and leaned my head on his shoulder, my eyes darkening. "Okay." An hour later, the cabin lights dimmed, and we both drifted into sleep. The plane landed in Chicago for a layover. Marcus was woken up by a flight attendant. He instinctively turned his head, but when he saw the empty seat beside him, his chest tightened. "Where is the woman who was sitting next to me?" Startled by his hostile tone, the flight attendant forced a polite smile. "Sir, the lady got off the plane first. Before she left, she told me to let you sleep. Weren't you two parting ways here?" The air in the terminal of O'Hare International Airport was thick with the scent of cheap coffee, jet fuel, and the low, constant hum of thousands of people in transit. Marcus Carter stood in the middle of the concourse, his tailored Italian suit, suddenly looking wildly out of place among the tourists and business travelers, pulling rolling suitcases. His face was a mask of cold, concentrated fury. "What do you mean she got off?" Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet, a tone that usually made his vice presidents tremble. The flight attendant stepped back, her smile faltering. "Sir, the lady had her personal belongings. She said she had an emergency layover change and that you were aware of it. She left about 20 minutes ago." Marcus didn't answer. He lunged past her, pushing through the gate and pulling out his phone. He dialed Chloe's number. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." He felt a sudden, sharp pressure in his chest. It wasn't pain. It was the sudden, violent realization of betrayal. He dialed his head of security, his fingers tapping the screen with vicious force. "Find her," Marcus hissed the moment the call connected. "She got off the plane at O'Hare. Put eyes on the security cameras, check the car rentals, check the train stations. Now." "Sir, we're on it," the voice replied, but Marcus had already hung up. He walked briskly toward the exit, his mind racing. She played me. The obedience, the submission, the quiet acceptance of his touch over the last 2 weeks, it had all been a performance. The near-perfect SAT score she had, dismissed as just average, wasn't a whim. It was her ticket out. And he had hand-delivered her to the airport, paid for her first-class ticket, and let his guard down because he believed she had finally been broken by her mother's betrayal. Marcus walked out of the terminal into the gray, humid Chicago air. He stood on the curb, watching the endless stream of yellow cabs. For 10 years he had been the center of Chloe's universe. He had bought her clothes, decided her schedule, paid her debts, and kept her in a gilded cage that he believed was the safest place for her. How could a bird with clipped wings fly? He pulled out his phone again and dialed Samantha's number. When his wife answered, her voice was light, filled with the easy confidence of a woman who had never known want. "Marcus? Are you in Boston yet?" "There's a change of plans," Marcus said, his voice returning to its smooth, controlled facade. "I have some business to take care of in Chicago. I'll be back in Las Vegas by tomorrow." "Oh, is that girl with you?" Samantha's voice turned instantly sharp. "The thief?" "No," Marcus said, staring into the traffic. "She's not with me." "Good. Keep her away from our life, Marcus. If I see her near you again, I won't. Just have her locked up for 10 days. I'll make sure she stays there." "I know, sweetheart," Marcus murmured. "Don't worry about her. She's being handled." He hung up, his eyes darkening to a shade of pitch black. He didn't care about Samantha's threats. He cared about the fact that for the first time in 10 years, Chloe had defied him and succeeded. At that exact moment, Chloe was sitting in the passenger seat of a black sedan, speeding down Interstate 90, away from the city of Chicago. Her hands were gripping the edge of the seat, so hard her knuckles were white. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped animal. Every time a police car or a black SUV passed them, her breath hitched. "Easy, Chloe," a calm, steady voice said from the driver's seat. "We're clean. Nobody's following us." Chloe turned her head slowly. Julian Vance was looking at the road ahead, his hands relaxed on the steering wheel. He looked older than she remembered from their high school days. His jawline was sharper, his shoulders broader under a casual linen shirt, but his eyes still held that same warm, intelligent light that had made him the top student in their graduating class. "He's going to check the airports, Julian," Chloe whispered, her voice raw. "He has people everywhere. In Las Vegas, in New York, in Boston. He owns private security firms. If he finds out I'm with you." "He won't," Julian interrupted gently. "We didn't book a flight. This car is registered to a subsidiary company of the Vance Group that has no visible paper trail to me. We're driving to Indiana first, then taking a private charter flight from a municipal airfield to a small airport outside of Worcester, Massachusetts. By the time Marcus Carter's investigators think to check private airfields in the Midwest, we'll already be in Cambridge." Chloe let out a long, shaky breath. She leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, watching the flat Illinois cornfields rush past. "Why are you doing this, Julian?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the road. "You don't owe me anything. In high school, we were just lab partners. We haven't spoken in 10 years. Julian paused, his gaze fixed on the highway. "Because back in high school you were the only person who could beat me in a math competition without even trying. You had this incredible fierce brain, Chloe. And then one day, you just vanished. No graduation, no yearbook photo, nothing." He turned to look at her briefly, his expression serious. "When my sister told me she had a student taking online prep classes who was scoring 1580 on practice tests while using a burner account, I looked into the registration. When I saw your name, I couldn't believe it. And when we talked, I realized what had happened to you." "I was a kept woman," Chloe said bluntly, her voice dropping all pretense. "I was bought for $3 million to pay off my mother's debt. I'm tainted. Julian, if Marcus finds out you helped me, he will ruin your family's company. The Vance Group isn't some small-time operation he can crush with a phone call," Julian said, a touch of pride in his voice. "We've been in Massachusetts for 4 generations. We have our own political connections, our own legal shields. And besides, this isn't charity, Chloe. I told you it's an investment." He reached into his pocket and tossed a folder onto her lap. "What's this?" she asked. "A formal contract," Julian said. "The Vance Group will pay for your tuition, boarding, and living expenses at Harvard. In exchange, upon your graduation and passing the bar, you will work as the chief in-house counsel for our International Acquisition Division for a period of 5 years at a fixed salary. It's a standard corporate sponsorship. Completely legal, completely above board." Chloe opened the folder. The terms were incredibly generous. It was a lifeline, wrapped in a professional agreement. It didn't feel like the golden chains Marcus had bound her with. This was a transaction between equals. "I don't know what to say," Chloe whispered, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. "Don't say anything," Julian said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Just study, get your degree, show him that you were never his to keep." Cambridge, Massachusetts. In the fall was a tapestry of deep reds, burnt oranges, and historic brick. For the first 3 months, Chloe felt like she was living in a dream. She lived in a small, quiet studio apartment 3 blocks from the Harvard Law Library, paid for by the Vance Group's scholarship fund. Her name on the university registry was Chloe Vance. Julian had arranged for her to be legally registered under a secondary family trust to prevent easy search queries from matching her real identity. She had no luxury bags, no designer dresses, and no chauffeur. She wore simple wool sweaters, jeans, and comfortable sneakers. She walked to class every morning through the crisp, cool air, her backpack heavy with textbooks. And she was happy, truly, deeply happy. She spent 18 hours a day studying. She read contracts, torts, constitutional law, and civil procedure until her eyes blurred. Her professors quickly took notice of the quiet, older transfer student who sat in the back row, but possessed a terrifyingly sharp analytical mind. Ms. Vance, Professor Alastair, a legendary figure in corporate law, said, during a seminar on hostile takeovers, "Your analysis of the Revlon duties in this mock acquisition is unusually cynical, but entirely correct. Where did you learn to spot these hidden liability traps?" Chloe stood up, her posture perfect. "I spent 10 years watching a billionaire acquire companies, Professor. You learn to spot the traps when you see how they're set." A few students laughed, assuming she was joking. But Professor Alastair simply nodded, his eyes filled with respect. "An excellent perspective. Keep it." After class, Chloe walked down the stone steps of the law school, wrapping her scarf tightly around her neck. The first snow of the season was beginning to fall, dusting the historic campus in white. "Chloe." She turned to see Julian walking toward her, wearing a thick navy coat. He was carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. "Julian," she smiled, her face relaxing completely. "What are you doing here? Don't you have a board meeting in Boston?" "I did," he said, handing her a cup. "But I wanted to see how the Vance Group's prime investment is doing. I heard from Alastair that you're already being considered for the law review." "It's just a rumor," she said, blushing slightly as they began to walk together through the Harvard yard. "It's not a rumor. He told me himself," Julian said, his voice warm. "You're doing it, Chloe. You're actually doing it." Chloe looked up at the towering library, then at the students rushing past, their faces filled with ambition and hope. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was part of the world, not just a spectator locked behind a glass window. "Thank you, Julian," she said softly, "for giving me my life back." Julian stopped walking. He looked down at her, his eyes serious, devoid of the teasing light they usually held. "I didn't give you anything, Chloe. You had the brain, the drive, and the courage to jump off that plane. I just held the door open." He reached out, his hand hovering over her shoulder for a second before gently brushing a stray snowflake from her hair. It was a gesture filled with respect, so different from the possessive, demanding touch she had been forced to endure for a decade. But just as she smiled, her eyes caught a dark figure standing near the campus. "go.At," a tall man in a long black wool coat, his hands in his pockets, watching them. Chloe's heart stopped. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, splashing onto the pristine white snow. "Chloe? What is it?" Julian asked, his voice instantly turning alert as he noticed her pale face. She couldn't speak. Her throat felt as if it had been clamped shut by an iron vice. The man by the gate took his hands out of his pockets. He didn't run, he didn't shout. He simply walked toward them with the slow, confident stride of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere left to run. It was Marcus. His face was thinner than she remembered, his jawline tighter, but his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, and filled with a dark, dangerous satisfaction. 10 years, Chloe," Marcus said as he stopped 10 feet away from them. His voice was smooth, carrying over the quiet rustle of the wind. "And you still can't handle a simple flight without getting lost." Julian immediately stepped in front of Chloe, his posture hardening. "Marcus Carter, you're trespassing on university property." Marcus didn't even look at Julian. His eyes remained locked on Chloe, who was shaking behind Julian's shoulder. "I must admit I was impressed," Marcus continued, a small mocking smile touching his lips. "Using a subsidiary of the Vance Group, changing your legal registry name, hiding out in a college town. It took my investigators 4 months to find the trail. You've grown quite clever, baby." "Leave her alone, Carter," Julian said, his voice low and threatening. "She has a legal contract with my company. She is an employee and a sponsored student. If you touch her, I will have the campus security and the Cambridge police here in 2 minutes." Marcus finally turned his gaze to Julian. The look was one of sheer amusement, as if he were looking at an annoying insect. "Julian Vance," Marcus murmured, "the high school sweetheart. Tell me, does your board of directors know that you're using corporate funds to sponsor your personal mistress? Do they know that the Vance Group scholarship is just a cover for you to sleep with my leftovers?" "She is not a mistress," Julian snapped, his fists clenching. She is a brilliant student who is at the top of her class. Something you could never understand because you only see people as property. Property. Marcus laughed, a low, dry sound. He reached into his coat and pulled out a document, tossing it onto the snow between them. I don't need to see her as property. The law does. Chloe looked down at the paper. Through the melting snow, she could see her mother's signature, along with a notarized seal. Your mother is a very greedy woman, Chloe, Marcus said softly. When she got out of prison, she realized she had no money. So she came to me, and we made a deal. She signed a full, retroactive parental custody and financial guardianship release. She legally declared that the $3 million debt I paid 10 years ago was a personal loan to you, guaranteed by your personal assets and future earnings. Chloe's breath hitched. No, that's not legal. I was 18. You were 18, an adult, and you signed the original promissory note that your mother co-signed, Marcus said, his voice dripping with malice. The interest has been compounding for 10 years, Chloe. Right now you owe Carter Enterprises exactly $7.5 million. He took a step closer, his eyes gleaming. And as the primary creditor, I have filed a petition in the Massachusetts federal court to freeze all your assets, including your educational sponsorships, pending a financial audit. You cannot receive a single dollar from the Vance Group. You cannot pay your tuition. By tomorrow morning, Harvard will receive a notice of financial hold on your account. He looked at her, his expression turning into one of dark, sadistic triumph. Did you really think a few books and a pretty campus could save you from me? You are a debtor, Chloe. And you belong to me until every single penny is paid. Julian tried to step forward, but Chloe grabbed his sleeve. She was pale, her lips trembling, but the terror in her eyes was slowly being replaced by something else. Something cold. Something sharp. She had spent 10 years in his house. She had read his files, listened to his late-night business calls, and cleaned his study. And she had spent the last 4 months studying the exact laws he was trying to use to crush her. She stepped out from behind Julian. She looked at the document on the ground, then up at Marcus. A promissory note signed under duress is voidable under Massachusetts General Laws Chapter 106, Section 3 to 305, Chloe said, her voice surprisingly steady, though quiet. Furthermore, the retroactive guardianship release your lawyers drafted is a blatant violation of public policy and constitutes third-party extortion. You paid my mother's debt to a criminal syndicate, Marcus. That was not a legal loan. It was a third-party debt assumption without my written consent. Marcus's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. And as for my sponsorship, Chloe continued, taking a step toward him, her eyes locking onto his. The Vance Group's contract is structured as an independent educational covenant. It is legally protected from creditor attachment under federal bankruptcy exemptions for educational services. If you file that petition tomorrow, my lawyers and the Harvard Legal Aid Clinic will countersue you for malicious prosecution, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She looked at him, her chin tilted up, just as he used to do to her, but this time, she was the one looking down. I am not the 18-year-old girl who fell to her knees in your office, Marcus, she said, each word hitting like a hammer. I am a law student, and I know exactly how to fight you. The legal battle that followed was silent, vicious, and fought in the carpeted offices of federal judges and high-priced corporate lawyers. Marcus did not back down. He hired the most ruthless litigation firm in Boston, filing motion after motion to disrupt Chloe's life. They tried to subpoena her academic records, they tried to depose Julian, and they leaked rumors to the local press about a scandalous relationship between a Harvard law student and her corporate sponsor. But Chloe had two things Marcus didn't expect: absolute focus and the backing of the Harvard faculty. Professor Alastair himself stepped in as her pro bono counsel alongside Julian's family lawyers. This is a classic case of creditor harassment used as a tool for personal coercion, Alastair argued before a federal magistrate judge. Mr. Carter is utilizing the federal court system not to recover a debt, but to harass and intimidate a young woman who escaped his custody. The judge, a formidable woman with no patience for billionaire tantrums, looked over the documents Chloe had compiled. Chloe had kept detailed records of every gift, every transaction, and every threatening text Marcus had sent her over the last 10 years. She had even retrieved her old phones, which she had safely stored in a safety deposit box before her escape. Mr. Carter, the judge said, looking coldly at Marcus's lead attorney. The evidence of coercive behavior here is overwhelming. Not only is this court denying your petition to freeze the defendant's educational funds, but we are also issuing a temporary protective order. If your client comes within 500 feet of Ms. Vance or the Harvard campus, he will be held in contempt and arrested. When the news of the ruling reached the Vance Group offices, Julian popped a bottle of champagne. We won the first round, he laughed, pouring Chloe a glass. But Chloe didn't smile. She was looking at a file she had received from a private investigator Julian had hired to look into Carter Enterprises' recent filings. It's not over, Julian, she said, her finger tracing a line on the financial sheet. Marcus is a narcissist. He won't stop because a judge told him to. Will try to destroy the Vance Group to get to me. Let him try, Julian said, his eyes darkening. Our family has survived market crashes and hostile takeovers. We're ready. No, you don't understand, Chloe said, looking up. Look at this. Carter Enterprises recently entered into a joint venture with Sterling Holdings, his wife Samantha's family company. They are heavily leveraged on a new deepwater port project in Boston. If that project fails, both companies will face a massive liquidity crisis. Julian leaned over her shoulder, studying the numbers. They've put up their primary shares as collateral. Exactly, Chloe said, a sharp, brilliant light in her eyes. Marcus thinks he's the only one who can play the game of leverage. But he forgot that I was the one who managed his personal ledgers for 5 years. I know exactly which bank holds his personal guarantees. And I know that Samantha's father is looking for an excuse to pull out of the merger because he doesn't trust Marcus. Julian stared at her, a slow, admiring smile spreading across his face. You're not just trying to defend yourself, Chloe. You're going to take him down. He wanted to buy my way into Harvard, Chloe said softly. Now I'm going to use what I learned here to bankrupt him. The luxury penthouse of the Carter Sterling estate in Las Vegas was silent save for the sound of a glass shattering against the marble floor. You did what? Samantha screamed, her face contorted with rage as she stared at her husband. Marcus sat on the leather sofa, his tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked tired, his usual immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. It was a temporary setback, Samantha. The judge was biased. I don't care about the judge, Samantha yelled, stepping on the shattered glass. Without noticing. My father called me this morning. He said the SEC is investigating our joint venture because of a leak about your personal guarantees. They're saying you used Carter Enterprises corporate funds to pay off a $3 million debt for your mistress 10 years ago. Marcus's hand tightened around his glass. That was a private matter. A private matter that is destroying our stock price. Samantha threw a stack of newspapers onto the table. Look at this. Billionaire Marcus Carter accused of corporate extortion and harassment of Harvard law student. My family's name is dragged through the mud because of your obsession with that high school dropout. She is not a dropout, Marcus muttered, his voice cold. She has a near-perfect LSAT. She's at the top of her class. Samantha froze. She looked at her husband, a sudden, horrifying realization dawning on her. You're proud of her. Marcus didn't answer. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes staring into the distance. You're obsessed with her, Samantha whispered, her voice shaking with a mix of disgust and jealousy. You married me for my father's money and my family's status, but you're still in love with that toy. You've spent millions trying to track her down, risking our entire merger just to bring her back to your bed. Shut up, Samantha, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a warning hiss. No, I won't shut up, Samantha screamed. My father is pulling our capital out of the Boston Port project tomorrow. We are filing for a dissolution of the joint venture, and I am filing for divorce. Marcus stood up, his presence suddenly looming, but Samantha didn't back down. Do you think I'm stupid, Marcus? She sneered, her eyes cold. I've already spoken to her. To Chloe. Marcus froze. What? She called me, Samantha said, a cruel smile touching her lips. She sent me the financial records of your personal accounts. She showed me exactly how much of our marital assets you used to fund your search for her, and how you hid corporate funds in offshore accounts to pay her mother. She offered me the exact evidence I need to strip you of your shares in Carter Enterprises during the divorce. She wouldn't, Marcus whispered, his face turning pale. She did, Samantha said, leaning close. She told me to tell you that this was her final lesson for you. You taught her that in your circle, everyone has a price. And she found mine. 1 year later, the historic Great Hall of Harvard Law School was filled with the sound of polite applause and clinking glasses. The annual law review dinner was in full swing, celebrating the top academic minds of the graduating class. Chloe stood near the podium, wearing a simple, elegant dark green dress. Her hair was styled in a neat bun, and she wore no jewelry except for a simple silver watch Julian had given her for her 29th birthday. She looked radiant, confident, and completely at peace. Congratulations, Editor-in-Chief, Julian said, walking up to her with a glass of sparkling water. He looked dapper in a classic black tuxedo. Thank you, Julian, Chloe smiled, clinking her glass against his. I couldn't have done it without my prime investor. The investment has already paid off, Julian laughed. The Vance Group stock is up 15% since we announced you as our incoming chief counsel. My father is already talking about retiring and letting us run the show. Chloe looked out over the crowd of professors, judges, and future legal leaders. It was a world she had once thought was as far away as heaven. Now she was standing right in the center of it, not as a guest but as a master. Chloe. A voice spoke from behind her. It was a voice she hadn't heard in 12 months. Yet it still sent a brief, instinctual shiver down her spine. She turned slowly. Marcus stood a few feet away. He was no longer the arrogant, untouchable billionaire who ruled Las Vegas. His suit was off the rack, his hair was graying at the temples, and his face held the hollow, haunted look of a man who had lost everything. Following his highly publicized divorce and the collapse of the Sterling merger, Carter Enterprises had been forced into restructuring. Marcus had been ousted as CEO by his own board of directors, and his personal assets had been liquidated to pay off his massive debts. He was a ruined man. Julian immediately stepped forward, but Chloe placed a hand on his arm gently, stopping him. It's okay, Julian, she said softly. Give us a moment. Julian hesitated, looking at Marcus with a hard, warning gaze before nodding and stepping back into the crowd. Chloe looked at Marcus. For the first time in 10 years, she felt absolutely nothing when she looked at him. No fear, no anger, no hatred, just a profound sense of closure. You look beautiful, Chloe, Marcus said, his voice raspy, devoid of the old commanding power. Thank you, Mr. Carter, Chloe said, her voice polite and professional. Marcus let out a bitter, dry laugh. Mr. Carter, is that what I am to you now? You're a stranger, Marcus, she said simply. A part of a past that I've already put behind me. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes searching her face desperately. I saw the news. You graduated first in your class. You're going to be the chief counsel for the Vance Group. You really did it. I told you I would, she said. You just didn't believe me. I was stupid, Marcus whispered, his hand trembling as he reached out toward her, but he stopped himself, remembering the protective order that was still active. I wanted to keep you safe, Chloe. I thought the world would destroy you if I let you go. No, Chloe said, her voice firm and clear. You wanted to keep me small so you could feel big. You wanted to be my only lifeline because you were too cowardly to be loved for who you actually are. She took a step closer, her eyes flashing with the cold, brilliant light of a woman who had conquered her own demons. You told me that a bird like me would always crawl back to your bed. You told me that school wouldn't teach me how to please you. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. But it taught me how to destroy you, and that is far more satisfying. Marcus stared at her, his lips parting but no words coming out. He looked at the crowd of powerful people who were watching her with admiration, then at the elegant, independent woman standing before him. He had spent 10 years trying to clip her wings, and in doing so, he had created the very force that had broken his empire to pieces. Goodbye, Marcus, Chloe said, turning her back on him. She walked away, her heels clicking rhythmically against the stone floor, her head held high. She walked toward Julian, who was waiting for her with a warm, proud smile, and toward the endless, open sky that was finally truly hers.